The assassination itself. On November 22nd, 1963, President Kennedy is shot and killed in the streets of Dallas. From Camelot and the Cultural Revolution, quote, "When word spread on the afternoon of November 22nd that the president had been shot, the immediate and understandable reaction was that the assassin must be a right-wing extremist, an anti-communist perhaps, or a white supremacist, but in any case a right-wing nut." Why was that the understandable reaction?
Peter, the reason for that was that from the early 50s, when Senator McCarthy came on the scene, into the early 1960s with the John Birch Society, and then with a great deal of violence against civil rights workers in the South, including assassinations and all sorts of other things, the general assumption in American life was that violence and irrationality comes from the right, and that if something like this is going to happen, it has to be one of the so-called hate groups. It has to arise from someone opposed to civil rights, a racist, or perhaps an anti-communist. During the course of 1963, there were several such events emanating from the right. Medgar Evers, a civil rights activist, was assassinated by the Ku Klux Klan
right.
in June of 1963. Kennedy invited the family to the White House in a show of support. In the summer of 1963, Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. That summer, the nation was shocked to see film clips of police in Birmingham, Alabama, using fire hoses and police dogs to scatter civil rights demonstrators. In September of 1963, the Klan blew up a church in Birmingham, Alabama, killing 4 young black girls. In October of 1963, Adlai Stevenson, the UN ambassador, ventured to Dallas to give a speech about the UN and was met by anti-communist demonstrators who heckled him, hit him over the head with a cardboard placard as he made his way to the car, and spat upon him. When Stevenson came back to Washington, he cautioned President Kennedy and his staff not to go to Dallas. He said there was a spirit of madness that had overtaken the city of Dallas. So events had been teed up for a period of time to suggest that if there was violence in American life, it would come from the right, not from the left.
Now, let's just take on the question of Lee Harvey Oswald briefly, because I don't believe, as best I can make it out, you don't give the, in your book certainly, you do not give the conspiracy theories the time of day, really. As far as you're concerned, who killed John Kennedy?
Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy, certainly, and he probably did so without assistance from anyone.
All right. Now, again, to quote from Camelot and the Cultural Revolution, quote, "If Lee Harvey Oswald had indeed shot President Kennedy, then it would be difficult," this is the heart of your thesis, really, Jim, "then it would be difficult to escape the logical implications of that premise. President Kennedy was a victim of the Cold War." Close quote. Explain that assertion.
Well, we may be getting ahead of the story, but as I write in the book, the interpretation of Kennedy's death was that Kennedy was a victim of hate and prejudice. That was what everyone said, and we can get into that a little bit. So the idea was that Kennedy, in the terms of the interpretation, that he was a victim of domestic forces. But if, in fact, he was shot by Oswald, a dedicated communist, and not just a communist, a man who had defected to the Soviet Union and had done many other things, which we can also get into, to aid the communist cause, then it was plain that Oswald's motives were linked to the Cold War, that he assassinated Kennedy for reasons not having to do with our domestic politics, but to stop Kennedy's Cold War policies.
The expectation was that if anybody shot a president, it would be a right-wing nut who did so. And instead, it was a communist who was so dedicated a communist that he had for a time defected to the Soviet Union, married a Russian, got sick of the Soviet Union. Why? The evidence suggests because the Soviet Union was insufficiently communist for him. Is that right?
The interpretation that he was bored, it wasn't really a revolutionary society. He thought
he preferred Castro and Che Guevara.
Well, he went to the Soviet Union because he thought it was a revolutionary society, and when he got there, he found that it was really a boring, status quo, bureaucratic country, and he became fascinated with the Third World revolutionaries like Castro, Ho Chi Minh, Mao, and that group.
I just want to pin down, it seems to me there's a weak form and a strong form of your argument. And the weak form is, whatever else we know about Lee Harvey Oswald, we know that he was not a right-wing nut.
Absolutely.
That's the weak form. The strong form is, what we know about Lee Harvey Oswald is that he assassinated John Fitzgerald Kennedy for ideological reasons. And that requires the hard work of adducing evidence about what was very likely to have been in Oswald's mind at the time. Do we know, for example, you say in your book that you suggest that he may have been in one way or another seeking retribution for the Kennedy brothers' attempts to assassinate Castro. Do we know that? To what extent? Where do you fall after writing the book, after pondering it, between these arguments, the weak argument and the weak form and the strong form?
Well, I lean to the strong form, as you put it, that Oswald's motive in shooting President Kennedy was to interrupt the Kennedy administration's efforts either to overthrow or to assassinate Fidel Castro in Cuba. That was probably why he acted as he did.